you guys.
Absolutely. Saw Joe yesterday. Coach Ogeron had his weekly press luncheon down here every Monday. He meets with the press and kind of that's the kickoff to the game week as LSU now looking towards Georgia Southern this Saturday inside Tiger Stadium. Saw Joe over there for a couple of minutes. As usual, looked very cool and calm. What has been in your mind the temperature of your son going into his final season?
Just a lot of excitement, optimism. He thinks they're well prepared and a lot of improvement. So he's just ready to get going, as I'm sure the whole football team is. And there comes a point in time where you're just tired of going against each other on the practice field, and I'm sure LSU feels that way today, ready to roll.
From a coaching standpoint, or just, I guess, from a father standpoint, being out of coaching and so long being in that trade, in that industry, and now being in the position where you are now, where you're just a dad, you're getting ready for the season, ready for your son to play football. What's kind of been the change in dichotomy there from one season to the next for you?
Well, it's a lot different, certainly. August 1, normally for the last 51 years on August 1, either as a player or a coach, I had been on the practice field.
Wow.
And so that was quite a shock. So actually I got on my bicycle and rode over to the high school and watched a little practice just to keep my streak going. But, you do a lot of reading about just different storylines and across the country, and that's been kind of fun to learn a little more about different teams all over. But just prepare for the trip to every LSU game. That's kind of my mindset right now, and my wife and I have spent a lot of time organizing how we're getting to different games, and just the grind of used to be two-a-days, no longer, but fall camp. It's been nice not to have to go through that grind.
Do you ever just take a look back at the last couple of years and maybe where you're at now versus where you were at when Joe originally called you and said, "Look, Dad, I think I'm going to transfer"?
Well, yes, it's a lot of things have changed since then. A lot of not only for me but for Joe, our family. I could have still possibly made the decision to retire if Joe had been at Ohio State. It was probably easier for me to get to a few games. It's 70 miles away, but even then, I wouldn't have been able to see many of them. So just knowing that I have the opportunity to get to those games has been awesome. And but yeah, I mean, it's Joe transferring was a life changer for our family, for sure.
And now here he sits, and for the first time in forever, he can't even remember. I mean, people aren't even asking questions about the quarterback. Everybody just feels so confident in him. But I want to talk to you, Jimmy Burrow, as the coach, Jimmy Burrow, because yesterday in Coach Ogeron's press conference, one thing that stood out to me was he was talking about kind of the rise of analysts, right, and how they were giving the cornerbacks these almost cheat sheets that had things like splits, and when they're in this formation or this split, these are the routes that they like to run, and percentage numbers, and all these different things that just weren't available a couple of years ago. So my question as a coach, if you have that information, how do you make it effective? How do you make sure your guys understand it without overloading them to the point where they're thinking instead of reacting defensively?
Well, that's a good question. I will say at the Power 5 level, they have a lot more financial support with analysts. We didn't always have that in the mid-majors, so it's been nice to see that. I mean, I've spent some time there and watched how that happens. A lot of that work when you're at Ohio University, for example, you have to do it yourself. You don't really have the luxury of a lot of analysts, but you just got to make sure that in a limited amount of meeting time, like you said, you don't overload them, because the worst thing can happen is guys thinking too much and and not playing fast. And I always thought that playing fast was really more the coach's responsibility, because if you do give them too much to think about, and they are thinking too much, then if you run a 4.5, you may play at 4.7.
Yeah.
And in reality, you want them. If they run a 4.5, playing at 4.5, and yeah, they gotta know what to do. But there's a lot of instincts that still kick in for great football players and great athletes that you just don't want to put too much on them as far as that. But there's a lot of good information, and I would say most of the players certainly can benefit from that.
And so you mentioned great players. We're talking to Jimmy Burrow, Joe Burrow's father, longtime football coach. And you talk about great players. This LSU defense seems chock full of them, and leading that pack is Grant Delpit. And you had Devin White this year. Now you have Grant Delpit. What as a defensive mind, what do you see when you look at Grant Delpit?
Well, just someone that can play interchangeable positions, someone who can blitz and play man and play zone. I think when you get a lot of players have a lot of great strengths, and some may be great man cover guys, but possibly not as good in playing zone or not as good blitzing. From what I've seen with Grant, he can do it all. You can line him up as a on the line of scrimmage to blitz. You can line him up deep to play cover 2. You can put him on man to man, and again, he's kind of like a linebacker, safety, corner, all mixed into one, and that's awesome. I mean, you can do a lot with someone like that, and I'm sure you'll see even more of that this year from LSU.
Coach Jimmy Burrow joining us here every Tuesday off the bench, ESPN New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria. Who are programs or maybe even specific coaches that you watch on Saturdays now that you'll have an opportunity to watch college football that you've been in the trade so long that either you're curious of how they run their program or their system or you have high respect for what they do?
I guess I'd start out with, because of all my family's ties to Nebraska, Scott Frost, and not only as a former player and an alum there, I just have always I worked with Scott briefly at Nebraska several years ago, and have kind of watched his rise, and so that'll be someone that I certainly will follow for a lot of different reasons. But he did such a great job at Central Florida, and then we were all glad that we were able to get him I say we, but Nebraska was able to get him for their head coach. That's certainly someone. I think down at Duke, that's an interesting game with Alabama. I've always thought they did a great job at Duke as a coach and as a staff. So that's a game that certainly interests me. And then I used to coach at Washington State and Iowa State, and those programs have coaching staffs that do a great job on both sides of the ball. So just probably the places that I'm most familiar with since I coached there. I certainly follow North Dakota State, one of the top programs really at any level, and they changed coaches a few times, and I was involved in that change from Division II to 1AA again many years ago, and so all those programs have great head coaches, great coaching staffs, and I like to follow a lot of the schools that I coached at.
Talking to Jimmy Burrow here. I'm also looking forward to Mike Leach and Wazoo, man. But let's bring it back to LSU and let's bring it back to Joe. The thing that we talked about constantly during this offseason has been the kind of philosophical shift that's taken place with this LSU offense. And to me, the crux of this shift is that instead of relying on the max protect and keeping guys in to protect the quarterbacks, they're going to rely on the quarterback's decision-making. And I guess what kind of challenges do you think that presents? And is Joe ready to protect himself from that rush by just getting the ball out of his hand?
Well, I'm confident that Joe can do that, and I know that the offensive staff has spent a lot of time certainly talking about that, making sure that everybody's on the same page. And as a defensive coordinator, you have to be careful about blitzing. If we can get it out in a hurry, then that limits blitzes on the defense. And they've done a good job from what I've seen in the spring and in the fall of just making sure that everybody knows what to do and the protections are right. So it's interesting. Again, as a defensive coordinator, I mean, if somebody spreads you out, what I always feared is trying to defend the pass is all of a sudden you can't stop the run. And I'm sure LSU is going to work hard at establishing the running game, even though the whole concept and perception really of LSU is they're just going to throw the ball all over the place. But as a defensive coach, you have to still stop the run, and sometimes you forget about that against the spread offense.
Longtime coach Jimmy Burrow, dad to Joe Burrow, LSU signal caller going into his senior season. Every Tuesday going to be here with us talking ball, and next Monday we'll be recapping Joe Burrow's opening performance to his senior season. Coach, we're looking forward to it, and once again we appreciate your time and your knowledge every Tuesday here on Off the Bench.
Thank you. I'm excited. My first game at Baton Rouge will be Saturday.
Wow.
So,
Hey, nice. Okay, everybody.
fired up.
You know what that means? See Jimmy Burrow, treat him some good time. Not that, anybody needs to be told, right? You're going to get all the free food and drinks. Probably, actually, you're going to get more than you could ever want.
I haven't tailgated in a long time.
Oh, that's right.
I think I'll get the hang of it fairly quick.
Yeah, you're going to be thrown into it for sure. All right, thank you, Coach. We'll talk to you next week.